He's currently stalling at this point. 5 years ago. And so
but she is still.
Definitely. I have a certain time.
That's just been weird. That's what I think. Hard, well, right, because it's a street. I was an aspirant. Like also. So. Well, that's good. More of a tree. We go back. I was being close to having the same.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scheduled on with you soon.
Good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. One more time, cheerleader voice. Thank you. Tyler, you don't want to be called out by name. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I will call the October 2nd meeting of 2024 ENRAC to order. And it certainly appears that we have a forum. So And we don't have anyone participating online.
Yeah, we need to do roll call and then we'll talk about
Okay.
online.
Sorry about
So that's okay. Melissa Lammer,
here.
Jessica Gao. Here. Wendy Anderson. Donna Brosnan. Here. Tom Burbank.
Here for now, comment please. I have a technician coming to my house sometime today between 4 and 6. So if I get up and bolt suddenly, please don't take it personal. Thank you. Here.
Thank you.
Bob Fitzsimmons.
Here.
John Havlick, Mr. Havlick is online, so when we're done with this, we're gonna have to vote to allow him to participate. Same with Bliss Jameson, she's also online, we're gonna have to vote for that. So John Geronimo.
Here.
Tyler Lomberg,
I am.
Sarah Lee Morrissey,
Here.
Jack Surratt, he told us he wasn't gonna be here. Michelle Widick.
Here.
And Bill Lights.
Here.
Okay, so we do have 2 members that would like to participate online, if you'd like to address that.
We need a motion from the floor to allow them to participate virtually. Tyler, motion, any second?
Motion.
Oh, okay, Donna's motion, Donna moved and Tyler seconded that we allow John Havlick and Bliss Jameson to participate virtually. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. John, Bliss, you're in.
And Mr. Havlick did let us know that he's catching a flight, so at some point he will drop off the call. And so, Mr. Havlick, if you have to go, if you would let us know, but we'll watch too on the screen.
It will be about 3 o'clock.
Thank you very much. Before we start our regular business meeting, we do have, fortunately, a fully constituted committee today with reappointments and new appointments. So I think it would be nice for us to go around the room and just briefly introduce ourselves to one another before we get going. And if you don't mind, Tom, would you like to kick it off? Just tell us a little about yourself and your relationship to this committee.
Oh, wow. Former land surveyor, then went to work for the county of Volusia, was a property appraiser and mapping supervisor for a number of years, drifted into planning for a while, then went to work for Zev Cohen Associates as a draftsman, came out as a project engineer 20 years later, went to work for the city of Deltona as a planning manager, was briefly the acting director. Lived in Deltona since 1967. I'm number 3, not number 1, sadly. Yeah, I know. A degree in tech illustration, management, environmental management, and gerontology. And this is fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And continuing to put new people on the spot, John, would you like to introduce himself to us?
I'm John Geronimo, architect. Before that, I was a school teacher in St. Pete. I also have a degree in urban design and planning. I worked for the planning department in Miami Beach, Miramar, Florida, and I was the city architect of Annapolis, Maryland. Spent close to 30 years in academia. And in 2010, I came to Orlando, was the founding director of Architecture Program. I was staggering distance from JD's Fish Camp in the Food Beach.
Thank you very much. Bob.
Yeah. I don't have to go again.
Excuse me. Bob Fitzsimmons, lifetime resident of Florida, 40-year resident of Volusia County, home builder and developer. Currently gallery homes of the land. And that's the real quick down and dirty.
Thank you, Bob. Tyler?
Tyler Lomberg, I'm 38. I was born and raised in DeLand, got my engineering degree from UF in '08, and I worked at DOT for about 9 years. And then I've been private sector roadway and drainage engineer since then.
Thank you, Tyler. I'll go last. Jessica?
Jessica Gao, land use and environmental attorney with Cobb Cole Law Firm. I'm in current chair of Volusia County Association for Responsible Development and a few other things that we don't need to go into.
Thank you, Jessica. Sarah Lee?
Greetings, welcome, new members. Sarah Lee Morrissey, been in Volusia since '87. Came here to be a city planner for City of Daytona and did that for a while and then got recruited by the school district and established planning for the school district for almost 30 years and did school construction and development. Worked with a number of the good folks here during that time.
Thank you, Sarah Lee. Bill, and welcome back, Bill.
Thank you. I'm Bill Lights. I'm an environmental consultant, long time, lifetime Florida resident. Been doing environmental consulting and planning, but really that's for the planners and engineers. So I work for an engineering firm now and just do a lot of this code review and development design.
Bye.
Is that I was a water lobbyist in Colorado for 9 years before coming back to Volusia County. And the special projects that I did in my professional life were mostly water, land use, and comprehensive plan related. Landfill remediations and major annexations and things like that, and everything had something to do with water. So I guess that's my.
Thank you, Donna. And Michelle, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Michelle Wydek. I'm a civil engineer and I've spent the last 5 years in land development. I'm currently pivoted my career back to where I started into the water research. So I'm happy to be here and collaborate with you guys to make things better and do things right.
Thank you very much. Wendy.
I'm Wendy Anderson, and I'm an environmental science professor at Stetson University. And I apologize for being late. I do teach a class until 1:15 that I let go early, but still not early enough to be on time. Anyway, so yeah, I've been on this committee for 2 years, and a lot of my interests are in water quality and ecosystem protection, and the ways that wetlands and other ecosystems are part of the hydrologic system. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Liz, would you like to introduce yourself in the online universe?
Good afternoon. My name is Bliss Jamison. I represent the Southeast Volusia Manufacturing and Technology Coalition. I am a realtor for Massey Properties and also represent Massey Ranch Air Park in Edgewater.
Thank you very much, Bliss. And John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. John Hoblick, lifetime resident in Volusia County. Have a small farm up in DeLeon Springs. Been working that, third generation. Went to work for the state of Florida's Florida Farm Bureau Federation and was state president for about 15 years. Now I'm retired and just dink around and fish and enjoy the outdoors.
Thank you very much, John. And my name is Melissa Lammers. This is also my second term on the committee, like most of us. I'm a former marketing communications professional, but for many, many years, including the almost 60, yes, I'm old, years that I've lived in Volusia County, the environment is extremely important to me. I'm on the board of Audubon, Florida at the state level. I'm on the board of Halifax River Audubon, the Environmental Council of Volusia and Flagler Counties, the League of Women Voters Natural Resources Advisory Committee, and the conservation chair for Florida Native Plant Society Pawpaw chapter, all of which are NGOs. But we do take an active interest in the environment, and what particularly interests me and why I wish to be on this committee is the intersection between science. As Audubon says, we use sound science to make our recommendations. So that intersection between science and policy and ensuring that Volusia County is a beautiful place to live for the next 60 years. Thank you. Shall we also introduce staff for our new?
I'm Ginger Adair. I'm the Environmental Management Director and your primary liaison for the committee.
I'm Samantha West, the Sustainability and Resilience Manager for Volusia County.
Morgan Swank with County Legal.
I'm Clay Irving, Growth and Resource Management.
Chris Ryan, also kind of legal. Davis, environment. Scott Ashley, zoning.
Lauren Catherine Appleton, County Engineer. Brianna Peterson, Berkeley Museum State.
Chelsea Wilton, environmental management. And last but not least, we do have
Someone without whom we can't operate these meetings. Do share your name. Yeah, thank you, Truman. This is an ongoing challenge, remembering to hit the speaker button so that the record is clear, so that Chelsea can do as great a job on the minutes as she did last time. So thank you very much. And again, before we get down to our agenda business, we do have a member of the public who would like to speak to us. We have Jesse Wales from the Indian River Lagoon NEP.
Like this live, right? So I'm going to stand in the middle of the room and try to.
Jesse, you could stay on too.
That would be so much easier. Thank you. Thank you so much for. I didn't even listen. Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Jesse Wales. I'm with the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. I just wanted to let you know about some funding that is coming available. Currently, we have 5 or 6 requests for proposals out for water quality, habitat restoration, and science and innovation. All of those are due mid-December, and we'll have about $825,000 available. Anyone is able to apply for those funds. The one that I wanted to chat about today is our new bill funding. So we received $1.18 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law to do projects in priority communities. So those are underserved communities that are identified by the EPA. You are eligible to apply if you are a nonprofit. You have to be located near or within the designated priority community. And then we are specifically looking for projects that improve infrastructure, community engagement, or organizational capacity. So I know that that may not resonate with the group here today, but if you know of anybody that runs a nonprofit or has a nonprofit and would be interested in applying for these funds, we are looking for letters of intent due by November 15th on that. So I have some flyers out that I will leave for you guys, and that's all I have.
Yes.
Wendy, are municipalities eligible to apply for those?
No, municipalities are eligible to apply for our regular RFPs. They are not eligible to apply for the bill funding. It's recommended that nonprofits of any size, from small nonprofits to large nonprofits, partner with municipalities, schools, governments, et cetera, for these funds. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jesse. That's exciting news.
Yeah.
So our first order of business today is to select a chair and vice chair for our next term. And with that, I open the floor for nomination.
I'd like to get a nomination by Melissa Lammers. Keep this, I already got a second. We've had great continuity and leadership, and it's my nomination.
Thank you, Bob. Any other nominations? Okay. So I thought about it. It's been an honor, and even more than that, a really great privilege to be chair so far. So any discussion? Thank you. So all those in favor of keeping me doing this tango dance? Any opposed? Thank you, John. Any opposed? All right, I will continue conducting the meeting. Thank you, Bliss. And open the floor to nominations for our vice chair. Our current vice chair is Jessica Gallup.
Steve? I nominate Jessica.
I'll second.
Any additional nominations for vice chair? Any discussion?
We are grateful to both of you.
I am very grateful to my vice chair. Let me tell you, all those in favor of Jessica as vice chair,
Aye.
Aye.
Bliss,
Aye.
thank you. Any opposed? Jessica is our vice chair. And the next order of business is setting our meeting agenda for the next couple of years or for the foreseeable future. Currently, as you realize, it's the first Wednesday, except when there are huge holiday conflicts, the first Wednesday of the month, that is the day. And then the time has been, early on, we voted ourselves a 3-hour meeting time monthly, and we found that we have needed that much time in our meetings. So we meet from 1 until 4 p.m. on the first Wednesday currently. So I don't know if you would prefer to vote first on day of the month and then on hour, or if you'd like to make suggestions. Sarah Lee.
I would like to make a motion that we keep our meeting the same day of the month and the same hours.
I will second that.
Third.
Thank you. Moved by Sarah Lee Morrissey, seconded by Tom Burbank. Any discussion? All those in favor of keeping our current schedule?
Aye.
Bliss?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? We do not have to change our calendar entries. We will continue meeting first Wednesday of the month from 1 to 4 p.m. and unless otherwise advised in this room. Thank you. Our next order of business is our September 4th minutes. Has everyone had the opportunity, have you had the opportunity to review those minutes? Would it? Sarah Lee, you're our prime minute reviewer.
Listen, folks, I read the minutes. I did not see anything substantive, and I am not going to correct grammar and spelling.
Anyone else? I am going to correct grammar and spelling. Actually, not grammar, just spelling. Page 2.
So much restraint.
She did. She did, but I think we're all really attached to our names. So it's just a small thing. Line 6, Alex Zielinski, not Zinsky. See, but I wasn't. Yes, they did, but I wasn't required to exercise restraint. So that's any additional comments to the meeting, to the minutes? Would someone like to move that we approve them? Okay, thank you. Moved by Donna Brosmer, seconded by Jessica Gao. Any discussion?
Ma'am,
Yes,
not here. I abstain.
thank you. Thank you. Our neophytes are abstaining. Thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes as written with the one correction noted? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? All righty, the minutes are approved. So now we can get down to the meat of our meeting today, which is to continue our discussion of low impact development. Thank you very much, staff. Samantha, Ginger, you're going to kick it off?
Samantha's going to do the hard work. I just wanted to say for our new members, just sort of our process. If at any time you have a question, because we're low tech here, we don't have like little lights or whatever. If you want to speak, it's good to put your card up, and then that way the chair will know that you have something to say, and then put your card back down when you're recognized. And if you have something that's urgent, by all means, break in. Otherwise, we'll go through a section and then ask for questions and discussions and do that the whole way. But of course, if there's something immediate that you just can't wait, put your card up and we'll deal with all of the issues as they come.
Thank you. That was really important, the reminder about the card. And I try to scan continually, but if for some reason I miss you, just kind of make a noise or something. The other thing that we discovered as a committee early on is we don't start looking at ordinance language, we start with the substance of the issues before us. They get explained to us. Sometimes we've had expertise outside of just our assigned staff members come and speak to us, and then we look at actual ordinance language. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, so up front, if you were or were not able to get them, there are comments from your fellow committee members. There's some from Sarah Lee, some from Jack Surratt, and then some from Tyler. Some of them are about the educational content. Some of them are about the incentives that we have gone through, or not incentives, but particular items we're going to go through today, and then items we went through last time. So have them. If you have any questions, I would bring them up during that.
I would just mention that it's wonderful that we got those comments in writing, but we didn't have the opportunity, I don't think, to review those prior to this meeting, or am I mistaken?
We did not send them out prior to.
So I don't, since our goal is to conclude LID today, I don't know if we need a moment to read through those or if we need the authors to call them out over the course of our discussion.
I think the second is the way to go, other than Mr. Surratt, who's not here. And so when he told us that he wasn't going to be here, I'd let him know that we would bring up his comments at the meeting.
You represent Mr. Surratt.
Absolutely.
Thank
I'm not as well as he does.
Clay.
And yesterday, there was a conversation I had with a former member, Ms. Shire, who wanted some clarification that was not available from the previous meeting regarding the application of the incentives for the I-2 zoning. I would like to be able to represent what she has said to me and a potential solution for this committee to think about.
Very good. Thank you very much. So at the appropriate moment, Clay becomes Suzanne Schreiber and Ginger becomes Jack Surratt, correct?
Fair
Thank
enough.
you. Samantha.
Okay. So just going over what we have completed from the last time, we went through the future land use elements, and in chapter 72, Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. So our ordinance is complete, and now we are into the LID guidance manual. Just going to briefly go through these slides, not talk about every single one of them, besides the ones that had changes. Like this one, the committee voted to change the density allowances to 8 dwelling units per acre for urban low and 16 dwelling units per acre for urban medium intensity as incentives. The other was the change to 10% bonus for floor area ratio within those land use classifications listed.
And excuse me, but that was what Ms. Schreiber
Right.
brought up several times.
Yes, what she was concerned about was the I-2 zoning has been the subject of a workshop carried out by the county council on July 23rd, where they identified that there may be pending changes. After our discussion, she clarified that perhaps this application of these bonuses for that zoning district should be held in abeyance until the council completes their review of the I-2 zoning. And then at that point, it would be applicable.
And this again was specifically for the floor increase, the 10% increase in floor.
Yes, the floor area ratio increase.
So I'll just add that if you want to do something different, someone on the prevailing side of that vote, that last meeting would have to request to bring it back up for discussion, and you would have to re-vote. So, and we'll check the minutes, but I'm pretty sure everyone voted yes on that, except for Ms. Schreiber.
That is,
Oh, okay.
there were 2 votes. One was unanimous and the second was 2. So, Bill.
So we're going to postpone that until the county council.
That's her request.
And that way, if it's increased or decreased by county council, then it's still 10% on whatever the result is.
It would still apply. Again, there was two separate issues. There's the dilemma we're facing with the uses that are allowed in the I2. And if you remember my conversation at the meeting, I explained that from a staff perspective, LID is a development standard. And so whether you agree with the type of use or not, you still would want that use to take advantage of those particular standards because they are a better standard. So therefore, there's two separate issues. Her concern was the fact that without really knowing what's happening within the I2 zoning, is that appropriate? So therefore, as we discussed it, I think that her main goal was let the county council work through what they're doing with the potential changes to the I2 zoning. And then once that's resolved, then this could be reinstated by amending the ordinance.
Jessica, then Tyler.
From my perspective, I think the issue is, and it was stated with the fuel farm concern and whether they should get an intensity bonus if they use LID. I think it's very hard to carve out just based on single users or uses, the rules that we want to apply. But this comp plan policy is just saying incentive bonus, they may be permitted. And I assume when we get to the guidance and the guidelines, it will say how you get to that 10%. So maybe we say industrial projects to achieve the 10% have to meet more design guidelines or something like that. So they're not just skating by with the minimum and they have LID, but I don't think we should cut out an entire zoning district from the regulations.
Tyler.
So I've listened to the meeting and listened to the comments from last month. And one of the things that I heard in this conversation were most of the concerns brought up were things that have relatively small office buildings and not a lot of warehouse space. And so the floor area ratio, I guess I might have a question for staff of would a fuel tank or a storage bin at for gravel or sand at a concrete plant or whatever else apply? Looking at the potential uses for I2, there's everything from plastics manufacturing to recycling facilities for transfer or processing of recycling materials, solid waste, a lot of other things where I could see warehouse buildings where a bigger floor area could be a benefit, but most of those don't fall in the category that Suzanne was bringing up as concern. And I don't want to speak for her by any means, but it's just a question of, am I interpreting that right? One, and am I getting the conversation from the meeting right in terms of where the concerns go to?
Correct. As you're going there, if you have a structure, that's where your floor area ratio incentive would come into, not necessarily open storage or those types of things. So from that perspective, what offices, warehouses, those types of things, not necessarily storage, would be eligible for it. Again, getting into the type of uses, the concerns that the county staff has identified. That first statement in the I2, any industrial use of land or structure is the primary culprit in why we're having to struggle through this discussion. And once that's resolved, I believe we'll have better clarity on the types of uses. And there will be uses, I believe, that where that 10% incentive would be worthwhile to pursue. Did that answer your question?
No, that makes perfect sense. I now understand where the conflict is coming from on it. And she kept saying it was an open zoning thing, but I think ultimately those uses, regardless, I fall under the opinion of some others from the meeting that that's not really going to be something that's going to be an LID friendly development anyway. And so those developers probably aren't they're not going to be looking for a floor area ratio incentive. I should restate it that way.
So going back to moving this along, as Ginger pointed out, whomever made the motion in the last meeting would have to bring it back. And we have pre-discussions involved at this point, which is to bring it back, to hold it in abeyance until the uses under the I2 zoning are decided by the council. Or Ms. Gal brought up a second path that could be considered, which would be to increase the requirements from an industrial use or LID in order to earn the incentives. They would have to do more, in other words. It wouldn't just be 2 stormwater and 4, yeah, it would increase those. But it all starts with Chris Ryan, who's going to render a legal opinion right here and right now.
Just a brief elaboration. It doesn't have to be whoever made the motion, it has to be anyone on the prevailing side.
I'm sorry, thank you. So that's the first step. Would anyone from the prevailing side like to revisit this? And that's everybody except Dr. Anderson, Wendy. Hey, we can move on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Clay and Ms. Schreiber.
So the next one was that we added clarifying language that Jessica suggested.
I'm sorry, could you go back to where you were just jumping from? Could you?
This one?
What was the last slide we were on, please? I was looking away. Okay.
This is the definitions, Article 1.
Thank you.
Changes.
Thank you.
Then we're on Article 2 zoning. There's no changes for this one.
I did have a question in that. Perhaps I'm bringing it up in the wrong spot. When we look at the chapter 72 definitions and it's the Article 2 zoning, that was left blank in what was distributed in the reading. But in our minutes from the last meeting, we seem to have said that my papers, I showed it to you before, seem to state that we would allow incentives of height increases, including along the coast. Mr. Hoblock brought up some concerns about rural areas, increasing the density and the heights as an incentive. And somehow it escaped me that we would offer those incentives in unincorporated Volusia County, including along the coast. And I'm questioning that. I don't know if we're actively offering it as an incentive, but we're not prohibiting it. And taller buildings along the coast, whether exactly on the beachfront or immediately across the street on A1A, which is zoned multifamily and is also zoned commercial in that area. Higher height limits than the current ones will cast shadows on the beach, which is not wonderful for beachgoers, and it also brings increased lighting concerns for nesting season, sea turtle nesting season. So I'm seeking clarification on that. Jessica.
I do agree, and I know that if you're thinking of the strip that's all like B5 down that corridor, their height is already 45 feet or something. It's pretty intense. We could suggest a distance limitation to say, except within 100 feet of A1 or something.
Tyler.
I think a while back, one of the comments I had made on this real briefly was we might want to consider a minimum slope ratio from the property line or something along those lines so that you reduce that shadowing effect. It's something that states with a lot of taller buildings and structures usually have is that, you know, your height is restricted to within some pyramid of the property lines.
That sounds suspiciously like an airport glide path.
A more verticalized version, but I mean, the idea would be that you don't have a 10-story building 10 feet from a property line that shades out an entire property adjacent to it.
Any guidance from staff?
If you were to, so there's 2 ways you can do it. We have the incentive section within the guidance manual that has restrictions on where those heights are allowed. That's further on in the presentation, but I'll go ahead and read it. Right now, we have it as the maximum height permitted within section 72-241, so the zoning ordinance. May be increased by 30 feet within multifamily, commercial, and industrial zoning classifications. So you can do that modification that you're suggesting within the manual itself. That could be, you know, modified as time goes on, or you can go ahead and insert it into this zoning reference here. and have the restriction stating that it cannot be in the coastal areas or however.
And keep in mind, this is an unincorporated county only, so a lot of that area, of course, is in the municipalities. But we do have some coastal areas, so it's worth the discussion. Our preference in general is to keep the technical requirements in the manual, not in the actual code. And so this is the code. So if it's your preference, we can bring this back. You know, we'd have to do the same thing. The prevailing party would bring it back, we'd make a change. But otherwise, we can make the changes in the manual if that's sufficient.
I guess I was a little premature in bringing this up at this point. Sorry about that. We can discuss it in the manual portion. And discuss how much weight the manual carries versus how much weight a zoning ordinance would carry in this particular. Thank you. Sorry about that, Sam. If that's all right, we'll just hold it off when we get into the, Clay Urban.
The great thing about having Scott Ashley behind me right there is that I've got the historical knowledge of all things zoning in Volusia County. And so he was bringing up that the majority of our beachfront condominiums and some of our residential aspects along there are zone B8. And right now, the maximum building height there is 115 feet. So you already have a building that's already somewhat tall. And I think what you're going to be seeing is the implementation of the LID standards addresses something that Tyler was bringing up, in that rather than having series of wide buildings which obscure the view of the ocean, you have an incentive to try and make them taller and skinnier, so that way you do have view avenues between the buildings if possible. Just again, want to make sure y'all understood what rules and regulations we currently have in place, how that would be applied, in some of the philosophies behind why you see that may be appropriate if you can, rather than allowing for a wider building, push for a taller building.
Just to have, sorry, I have microphone late. There are already 8 zoning that if you look parking underneath the building, you get additional height. And I think it's part of the LID too. We're looking at if you do things where you limit the impact of the land by putting parking in the building, that's one of the incentives we were talking about, allowing for additional height. The zoning already requires, for most of our condos would be if you can go up a certain height, you have to increase your side and rear setbacks. So as you go up, you are pushing it in toward the center of the lot.
Okay, we're getting to what was going to be my next question, because we're offering height, and the way it reads right now is height and setback modifications. So there is
a potential conflict.
An evil mind could think, oh, we're going to build every bit of available space and up as far as we can. So.
Okay. What? Huh? It's old slides. No, it's me. Okay. This is for removing the barrier for the non-mountable 6-inch curb. No changes. No changes for this one, for landscape.
I actually had a question on that, I think. Sorry to interrupt you again, Sam. So this was a barrier we all agreed on needed to be removed, but the way that it's worded, and I'm referring to the document that was circulated for Chapter 72, does this help us to get where we want? In other words, you're not required to have that curb, but curb is what we know. You know, that's what we're used to building to. So does this help us to get to less curb and gutter construction and more things like vegetated swales, or that really comes in under the incentives?
So this is a change to the zoning ordinance itself, so that any developer can choose to use this on their site. They don't have to be doing an LID development.
Okay, thank you.
Next is no changes to landscaping within an interior landscaped area. No changes to this one.
Do we have, again, on the document, the zoning document, section E, are there areas, just out of curiosity, of the county where we do offer reclaimed water for irrigation? I know the cities do. Thank you.
And I misspoke for this one. This is for the alternative irrigation methods. We did add language in the code as Jessica has suggested before. So we're providing flexibility with design by right, including dual LAD stormwater landscape areas to promote water conservation. Moving into the land development regulations, there were no changes here for concurrency or barrier removals.
I'm sorry again, back to comp plan. Sorry, Samantha.
Comp plan?
Yeah, back, just a quick question where, sorry, I keep messing up my papers. I had it in front of me. So we were saying that developments, it was SG 2.1.5, developments meeting the criteria below may arrange lots in a compact fashion, et cetera, et cetera. And the site must be serviced by central utilities at the time of application for development approval if the developer chooses to cluster the lots and receive density bonuses. I think that was in the section covered in the previous section of the PowerPoint. So many times, at least where I live, I have to admit, I focus on Ormond Beach and unincorporated Volusia County abutting Ormond Beach. And in that particular case, there really isn't utility extension or much of it by the county. I don't think it mostly is annexations by City of Ormond Beach as the provider of utilities to any new development. Do we have many areas in the county that we actually, if a developer wants to cluster the lots and we're saying there has to be an existing hookup to utilities, are there many areas in unincorporated Volusia County that have that possibility? It was just a point of curiosity.
Volusia County Utilities is one of the smaller utility providers. We have limited areas primarily in the southwest and over here on the, southeast and over here on the west side near Deltona. So do we have lands that are available for it? Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Land development regulations, we added the new Division 19. There were no changes to the language for the new Division 19. And then we got into the deliverables for the LID manual. Went through the standards, in which we can go back to after we go through each of the incentives. There was no comment, but we did not have a motion yet on the flexible lot sizes.
I'm gonna be Jack here for a minute, so, but do we have a slide on this? So Jack's comment was that on one of the slides, we talked about prohibiting fill in the FEMA designated flood hazard areas for development of lots in an LID development. With the implication then that you could fill in the floodplain for things other than lots. And so his question was, is that what we mean? Does it mean that you could have fill in the floodplain if it wasn't explicitly for the development of lots? He wanted to see if maybe you guys wanted to have a discussion about that, but that is the case. You know, there could be an instance where you can't avoid fill in the floodplain for something like the roads. But that if you want to do an LID development, you can't fill floodplain to create new residential lots. So I don't know if you all want to discuss that, but that was his question. Is that in fact what we meant? And it is what we mean. And so.
Trying to phrase this, is the intent of development of lots that would cover more than just the initial development. And it would cover, say, you can't fill in any areas to put in a pool later on or anything like that as well. I think just within the boundary of the, because I understand the road aspect. I just want to make sure that like accessory structures down the road. Fine.
Yes, that you're not filling in the floodplain for the benefit of the residential lot.
So, is that any floodplain at all? What if there's a tiny bit of floodplain and you need to have one lot on it? Then are they kicked out of all density bonuses or?
Yeah, the way that we drafted it right now is that you cannot fill the floodplain for the benefit of creation of lots. If you have to cross the floodplain or whatever, because that's your access, that's different.
I have to kind of chime in on that because as we are getting now several years past Ian and Nicole, we are still getting feedback from FEMA in regard to our floodplain management standards. There is an expectation from FEMA for us to, I would say, become much more critical in the implementation of that. And so I don't believe that if we put any kind of incentives aside associated with filling in the floodplain, it would pass muster. So we do need to be very, very careful about that.
When you say putting incentives aside, you mean offering those incentives? Yeah, thank you.
So if everyone's okay with that, then we'll move back to where we were.
Wendy.
So if we had fill for a road that needed to cross the floodplain, I mean, I know that probably the standard for road buildings is outside of my area of expertise, you know, and includes some culverts to maintain that natural hydrologic flow. But is there a kind of LID version of a culvert that, you know, would be kind of a wider swale or something that would go into the road that would allow, I mean, culverts get blocked. You're seeing it all over the county. Culverts are, you know, filling up and backing up. And so is there, I'm just wondering in the LID, you know, world, if we have things that we would want to specify.
We could address it through the compensatory storage, because if you fill within a floodplain, we require some form of compensatory storage.
Well, that's my question.
Yeah.
The question is there a different way to design a culvert? A method for designing a culvert?
I suspect Tom may have
I believe that's called a bridge.
Oh, he just made his mark. Tyler.
So in dealing with fill in the floodplain, Clay brought up compensatory storage. Are we having a no fill at all rule, a no net fill, and no construction rule? It just says no fill, right?
So if you want to do an LID development, what it says is you shall not fill in the floodplain, not like no net fill. Don't fill the floodplain to create a new residential lot. If you're not doing an LID development, you know, whatever, you know, rules apply. But in this case, to get the incentives, no lots in the floodplain.
But a shed on piers, something like that, and the floodplain is fine. A pool that gets flooded during 100-year flood event is fine. We can build in the floodplain still.
Actually, don't know the answer to that. That's.
The rules allow you to put a pool.
No, well, this is dealing with, don't create a new lot that's in the floodplain, right? So if you don't have a lot there, you're not building a pool on it, you're not building a house on it. No, don't create lots.
So none of the floodplain lots can be in the floodplain,
Yeah.
even if it's not a buildable area.
Well, you would look at our typical standards we have for floodplain development, that's already in the land development code, which we don't create lots that are fully within the 100-year floodplain. Typically, people would be filling those lots and getting the letter of map change, right, afterwards. So you wouldn't be doing that here. Now, if you had like a little portion of that lot that is within the floodplain and it's not going to be affected by the development of the lot for a house, then that would be fine. But you wouldn't be putting any, because you wouldn't be putting fill in it, right?
Yeah, I'm also thinking like lakefront dock, things of that nature. People are gonna wanna
That there would be a
build within
portion of it.
floodplain.
in the
It's- if you
floodplain.
have
There'd be development
property,
area
it has to be
outside of
for a
it.
lot.
Yeah, but you're not gonna be putting fill within.
And I have a question, stupid question probably. Just to make sure we're not disincentivizing LID. The ability to build on floodplain is not more available to non-LID development than to LID development? Okay, so how are we getting? I mean, if I want to put as many homes on a parcel of land as I possibly can, and there's some floodplain on that land, and if I don't do LID, I can build more houses on it than if I do LID. Are we not shooting ourselves in the feet? But they don't get the density. Thank you. I told you it was a stupid question.
What I'm saying that is you do have a lot more stormwater area that gets taken up when you start doing shallower stormwater, which is what a lot of green stormwater infrastructure is about. So one of the complaints that I hear consistently from the public listening to council meetings, attending over, I don't know, 20 years of time span is that when we fill 6 feet in order to build our houses and then drain them to our roads and then drain our roads to a stormwater pond and stack water 3 feet vertically in the stormwater pond, and then we put the bottom of the pond at grade basically so that we can make the geotech work. That the result is that we're building these islands that cut off surface flows that existed previously and that were causing problems. But the nature of spreading out our stormwater more is that it becomes very challenging to achieve density. I was this morning playing on my computer with like plot sizes, and 4 units per acre, if you have a 50-foot wide road right of way that's not part of the lots, is only 9,075 square foot lots. Those are pretty small. When we get to 12 lots per acre, that's 3,000 square foot lots or 3,025 square foot lots. So that's going to be, if you go 125 foot depth, which is kind of a typical subdivision lot depth, plus or minus, a 12 lot per acre is at 24 feet. And I haven't accounted for stormwater. So I know when I traditionally did stormwater designs, we'd be 15 to 20% with the conventional system. West Volusia, it's give or take about the same East Volusia. There's some differences code for open basin. Now that we're dealing with nutrient removal, other things, we're seeing anywhere all the way up to about 50% of our developed area has to be matched in stormwater area. That's a pretty substantial deviation for us to triple the size of our stormwater facilities. To achieve the densities that we're talking about and accommodate that, you have like 1,000 square foot lot where you're talking apartments, or these are not fee simple lot residential construction items. And I don't know if everybody understands that, but when we're talking about Volusia County, the areas that we can develop that have land that are left that aren't going to be incorporated, that aren't inside of a utility service boundary agreement already for one of the municipalities, where to get the utilities to support this density and to meet fire code for it, you have to annex to the city. I don't know how many apartment developments there are. So what are we incentivizing? That's kind of my question with this. And maybe I don't know what I don't know, but I've never achieved more than 4 units per acre in a single family. Even with townhouses or other things, we aren't achieving 12 units per acre unless it's something that has rear entry or a single car garage and just isn't a square footage that supports more than 2 bedrooms.
Good question, Bill.
So then, am I hearing that we really can't do this? And that, so did the code audit tool, did it, like, are we going to be allowed to do 24-foot wide lots if we do low impact development?
I mean, and that's
what I heard.
Yeah,
right.
You'd have 20, 20, and then like 28 on ends and do a 4-unit townhouse building. And then you'd have, 8 feet of side yard, 8 feet of side yard, you're not building. And if you have to run a pipe between buildings or something, it's through those side yards. You'd have room for a 15-foot drainage easement, or you're in your buildings.
And the public hates that kind of density.
Well,
so
yeah.
Will we be able to do that?
Because what they're complaining about is this.
So then the option is that you don't do an LID development, I guess, because, I mean, So this particular requirement is to prohibit additional density in the floodplain, right? Which is presumably a good thing and something that FEMA is, wrapping us on the knuckles about right now, right? So, how much space you need to meet the new, stormwater criteria and that kind of thing is, I guess the question for this group is, do we want to be able to facilitate additional development at the expense of the floodplain? Or do we want to say, if you're an LID development, you're not putting new stuff in the floodplain? That's really the policy question. And the dimensional things will work themselves out or they won't. But from a policy perspective, do we want to promote and incentivize development that puts new people in the floodplain at risk?
Thank you, Ginger. So in order of appearance, Clay Irvin, Wendy Anderson, Bill Lights.
I'm having a flashback to 2014 when we were discussing the conservation subdivision. There was a great deal of concern as to whether or not we should have minimum lot sizes, minimum dimensional requirements, et cetera. If you read the conservation subdivision, the answer is no. Because in order for these types of developments to occur, it is going to require an out-of-the-box thinking. This is not going to be your conventional 75 by 100 foot builder's quarter acre lot type of subdivision, because we are again trying to encourage more open space, concentration of development, and trying to keep the natural grade and natural vegetation as much as possible. So we will make sure from a staff perspective, as we are saying to you here, as this proceeds through the Planning and Land Development Regulation Commission and to the County Council, please be aware that when you start trying to implement these things, you are not going to necessarily wind up with acre, half acre, quarter acre lots. This is going to be that development that is very interesting. If you look at the density, is probably going to be around 2 units per acre, but where it's developed is pretty intense. And the reason why is and I'm speaking from the conservation sub, you've got 60% of the total land in open space. So again, I think Tyler brings up a very good point, and I think Bill brings up a really good point, is that the generalized public, when they come in and they see the concept plan that's on the screen as the planner is talking about how this is the greatest thing since sliced bread and canned beer, they lose their mind because they're on 30-foot lots. And so that's where we as the staff have to make sure we're doing our best to educate as to why a 30-foot lot provides a greater environmental lift and an overall benefit to the area.
Thank you very much, Clay. Wendy.
I was just going to respond to the question of, are we just shooting ourselves in the foot? I mean, if you look at the matrix, we've got a whole portfolio of incentives. The density bonus is just one of many. The density bonus isn't going to work in every place, and yet, the developers can still take advantage of several of the other incentives, even if the density bonus doesn't work in that particular case.
Did you still want to say something?
Yes, this is not related to the floodplain. So this is a different conversation, right? I agree that we should not allow floodplain impacts for the lots and move on from there.
And on that, I will also not make my comment because I agree with that. I would just mention that there are articles all over the press this week after Hurricane Helene, really emphasizing how just about everyone needs to buy flood insurance, and the cost of that flood insurance is going to be tied to what community allows to happen in their development. So just to kind of echo what Claire said earlier from a different angle. Thank you.
Like to discuss our incentives. As I stated, we went through the flexible lot sizes last time. There were no changes, but there wasn't a motion yet. And we can go through all of the incentives and then go back and move
Change flexible building setbacks.
Yes, flexible building setbacks is this slide. So we did change flexible building setbacks, as is shown on the screen. As Mr. Havlick had requested and y'all voted on, to make sure that that outside perimeter boundary does not have the flexibility. They have to comply with the setbacks that are already designated within the zoning ordinance for that specific zoning classification. But interior lots would have that flexibility. Moving on to something new. Okay. So on the lot development standards, we have the increased density specific provisions listed in here. So did we have any questions or comments on this as you reviewed it prior to the meeting? Yes, we have the 8 and 16 dwelling units per acre, as was already changed previously. So I mimicked the manual to be as you had moved for the comprehensive plan change.
Jessica and Bill. Jessica.
This is literally, but on the last one, can we just clarify that conservation subdivisions cannot gain additional density beyond the bonuses allowed as a conservation subdivision?
Yes.
Maybe there was overlap in this.
Okay. Any other changes for that one? And then we move on to the next. Okay, floor area ratio. Developer may increase floor area by 10% within those land use classifications we already stated within the comprehensive plan. Are we okay with those still?
We reiterated that at the beginning of the meeting.
Wonderful. Okay, and so that goes for all the land development incentives. So do we want to go ahead and have a motion on the remaining land development incentives?
This is still including the height.
Height is in zoning. So we'll be moving on to the zoning incentives
Okay,
next.
thank you.
So this is the floor area ratio, increased density, and then the flexible lot sizes.
I can't make motions.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend the incentives as outlined in Chapter 2, lot development incentives.
Do we have a second? So motion made by Sarah Morrissey, seconded by Donna Rosen. Discussion. Any?
So how is this motion different from the approvals that we already made last time? Which we already went through all of the motions for approving incentives.
We did not approve the, we as in you, as the committee, did not approve the incentives listed within the manual. So these are the regulations in here before you did the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance and land development code.
But they're the same, right?
Yes, it mimics,
Okay.
but this is like the implementing regulations.
It's the next step.
Yeah, so right now we're looking at the BMP manual and so the incentives and then like what you get for.
I understand, and of course, they need to be consistent. It just felt a little redundant.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And we can, if nobody had other comments about the incentives. And because we've already looked at the zoning code, the land development code and the comp plan, we could approve the whole slate of them if that's where everybody's comfortable.
We have a motion and a second on the floor, which was only about the density increases. Engineer is offering us another route, which would be to say, okay, all the incentives that we did are free, but we have to deal, I believe, with the motion. Legal.
Yeah, and in the, just to clarify, the motion was to approve all of the lot development standards.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Seconded by Don
So
Russell.
we need to do.
Discussion?
So to follow up on my question, it's since what we're doing is mostly redundant with what we've already done. If it's not redundant, is now an opportunity to perhaps revisit the industrial category and maybe put some specifications within the manual, in the implementation manual that indicates that there might be certain times when we don't want to offer the floor, the floor area increase incentive.
Yes, no.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what that language needs to read like, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to maybe flesh that out here. Sorry,
May I comment on that? So Ginger said now is the time to take a look at that. I know from when we worked on the space overlay, industrial uses for that. That particular exercise in place, not in the room right now to answer, but in that particular exercise, there was a standard list, and maybe I speak to this, the standard list of industrial uses that we actually combed through, because there were a few that the citizen group was not comfortable with, and we did that exercise with Clay, I think in 2020, 2021, somewhere around there. So I don't know if this is a case where there's a rather extensive list of industries that have to be gone through, and
Well, yeah, you could do that, but because the I2 zoning basically says in any other industrial use, we would have to like think up the universe of what those might be. That's not a list. There is, this and that and anything else.
yeah.
So that would be tricky.
The thing that is driving this, of course, is the fuel farm situation in unincorporated Volusia County, right? Really in Ormond Beach, but we don't know what we don't know. So I'm not anti what you're saying, Wendy. I'm just trying to figure out how we would even grapple with it. Bill and then Jessica.
So, and I guess instead of complicating it, maybe we can just finish this one and bring that up at a later time? No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something to just keep in mind, this is a lot of energy on 5 parcels that are zoned I2 in the county, and they're all right there on Hull Road. So I think that, it's not like it's a huge countywide issue, so.
Thank you for that clarity. Wendy.
So can we just simply put in an exception to I2 at this point?
Jessica, you have your name up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we first talked about LID and incentivizing it, we talked as a group at that point about creating different levels. And so, and I know there are different pockets, and we'll get to the manual, but if this said, subject to the conditions set forth in the manual, then the manual can say you get a 5% increase if you do 2 out of here and 4 out of here, or whatever it is, and then you can go to 10 if you do 3 more, or whatever it is. And that gives you the protection of the standard industrial saying we're bolting our stormwater so we can have 80% impervious, and that counting is LID. But again, there could be good I2 uses because they've taken all of the I1 uses that should use LID. So.
I just, in response, Wendy, to your question, I think the problem is there's not any of the LID incentives that would apply to the uses that would maybe present an adverse interaction with some of the residential neighborhoods adjacent to it. The things that would be adverse use cases should be captured through the noise and air evaluations because they'd be things of managing material with us. The reality is that you're dealing with floor area ratio or a dwelling unit density bonus or something that it doesn't affect industrial open space. It doesn't affect a warehouse getting a little bit bigger. I don't think it's necessarily a compatible use here. So I kind of think it's okay to include I2. I see there being beneficial cases for it on these parcels. I mean, our main offices are like a half block from there. So And we have personal vested interests as the owners of the business as well.
Okay, and I just need someone to repeat it again. It says the motion is to accept all of the lot development incentives. I just still run it by me one more time, how along the coastline, we're not gonna end up with someone building as wide as the lot allows and taller than what is currently allowed.
Right now, the lot development incentives do not include increased maximum height. The only one there is flexible lot sizes. And the flexible building setbacks and the building setbacks. You had voted on last time to state that if it's an exterior boundary setback, they have to abide by that. So if you have one lot on the beach or a condominium, then they would have to abide by the setbacks that are already within zoning.
And the height.
So did I misspeak when I said now's the time? Because the only two that we're talking about right now are lot sizes and building setbacks, and we're in density, floor area ratio, and all that is in zoning. Okay, so what are we voting on for this one? Flexible lot sizes.
Voting on flexible lot sizes. Building setbacks you did last time, but if you wanted to open that up again. Density. And floor area ratio.
Okay, so
That is
we've
it.
gotten the height again. All right, so
Correct.
the motion that we have, Sarah Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, is to approve all of these as we have just reviewed them. And that motion has been seconded and we have some discussion. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the online, I'm sorry, online, I heard John Bliss, did you also, Did you Bliss up? Okay,
I'm
any
having a
opposed?
hard time hearing everybody, so if you could restate that, Melissa?
Okay. The motion was to accept, if you're following along that PowerPoint, all of the chapter 2 lot development incentives. And that's density, setbacks, which we already approved. And what was the third thing, Samantha? Floor area, the floor area incentive. So to approve those 3 things in one fell swoop, and we are taking the vote yay or nay on approving all of those.
Okay, yay. And also I've sent an email. I cannot see the presentation.
Okay, what we can do about that is, have you downloaded it or do you have it on, you click on the link that Chelsea sent out, there's a link to the PowerPoint.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay,
That's
so
what
we're
I'm
on
doing.
page, Samantha can say the page number we're on.
It, from what I'm aware, and other people in the audience can see the presentation online. So it may be your settings list.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we had the yay votes. Do we have any nay votes?
Nay.
Okay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so next we're gonna get into the zoning incentives, and there are 7 of those. Just rename them off real quick so you understand, is the increased maximum height, the best management practice permitted within landscape buffers and setbacks, best management practice permitted within landscape islands and row ends, best management practice or BMP credited as landscaping, BMP credit as common open space, off-street parking flexibility, and increased lot coverage. So I know there's discussion that we want to have on height. This is the first of the zoning incentives. And it shows that we would increase it to 30 feet within multifamily, commercial, and industrial zoning classifications.
30 feet being about an additional story or just 0.
And the proposal on the increased height is that would be an incentive for, are we even, do we want to do that? Which BMP?
We don't want to do that. Never mind. Ignore me.
So this says that we offer height incentives everywhere in unincorporated Volusia County.
Within those zoning classifications.
Within
So
the zoning.
not within residential zoning.
Yeah.
So the,
Tyler's.
I was looking up the code for BV for the beachside condos. And what the height restriction had was you had, say, a standard side yard setback of 15 feet, and the rear, if it was ocean front, it was 25. If it wasn't ocean front, it was 20, if I'm remembering right. And then you increased it by a foot for each 3 feet of building height above, I think it was 35. And so in this case, that could be an increased setback of 10 feet that might be a good idea for us to include if we're allowing taller structures. Just like what's included in B8.
I'm not sure we all follow you, Tyler.
So if we are saying that we're going to increase maximum building height for 30 feet by 30 feet, the existing codes that we have that allow taller buildings require an increase in building setback when you build that building taller than 35
So if you
feet.
build higher, you're gonna build farther back.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's a 1-to-3 ratio, 3 feet vertical for 1 foot horizontal. That's in the existing code. I think it's just a good example to use.
So that's why you said 30 feet, 10-foot setback.
So that's possible. I mean, it's not gonna cut out. It's as you get taller, you get narrower, and that solves the problem of view sheds and.
Somewhat. There, I'm not a building designer or architect, but it's not my area of expertise. But the taller that you make a building, the longer its shadow casts. It's like a tree. I think we all understand that. The wider it is, the harder it is to see through it at ground level. So it kind of depends on what our objective is in different regions. And then B8, the goal might be to try to narrow things up and get them taller. If we're talking multifamily and we want there to be a feeling of more open space, a 6-story or 8-story condo or apartment building might be more conducive to that than a field of 2-story apartment buildings that are more shut together.
So the comment I wish to make on this goes beyond those purview, unfortunately, but I have to make it. I live in unincorporated Volusia County, just off the coast. And so, yes, I can see impact of taller buildings and shadow, and I get the mathematical formula that Tyler's talking about in an effort to kind of, as you said, or sort of said, preserve view shed. But that's not the only thing that concerns me. I'm looking at a beach that's disappearing. And I'm looking at Florida Department of Transportation right now, carrying out the vegetation along the dune so that they can install a seawall. Essentially, it's a sea cant wall, but it's the same thing as a seawall. And to do that, they've already had to move A1A ever so slightly onto easements that condominium dwellers would consider their front yards. And it just concerns me increasing. There's not a lot left that's buildable up in that area. And I'm sorry, I don't know the southern end as well. But it just seems to me that there's a lot at stake in putting more people on the edge of the ocean in Volusia County.
So I did hear a suggestion earlier about either exempting certain areas from this incentive or coming up with some sort of distance from something. So if there's a solution that you all are thinking, let's throw that out there.
Do I have to give a lot to make a motion? Jessica?
Given that last comment from you about the oceanfront specifically, I see two options. One, we can say will not be permitted within a distance of A1A, which is beachside. 100 feet will catch
Each side.
most. Yeah, I say, or we could just say east of A1A. But I think earlier there was a concern on close to the other side. So you could say east of A1A or within 50 feet on the west side of A1A. And that may give you the corridor.
Did you have two?
I combined them.
So you want to.
If the maker, we had an original motion. To approve? No. Okay. So then if that's the only change we're worried about with the other items that Sam mentioned. I would make a motion that we accept the zoning incentives with the modification that building height is not available east of A1A or within 50 feet on the west side of A1A.
I would second that unless we have any other changes coming down the pike with the next incentive, so.
Okay, discussion and I question.
I mean, I guess if I may just interject, do we need to finish going through the zoning incentives before we make the motion formally?
Depends on if everybody read them or not. I did.
Yeah, two options. We can go through and talk about each one, or if everybody read them and doesn't have comments on them, we can get to the end. And the only reason I say this, not to be trying to push in any direction, but we're really hoping to get LID done this meeting because next meeting Samantha's not here. So no pressure, but we are trying to get as much done today as possible.
So the motion is to include, as appears in the PowerPoint, all of the zoning incentives with a modification only to the zoning incentive dealing with height. And the clarification there is within 50 feet of State Road A1A or east of A1A, both. And I would say east of A1A the barrier island, because east of A1A does not leave it open to be where east of A1A.
I do have a suggestion just on the language, and if you guys give us the concept, we'll come up with the words. But in the southern portion of the county, A1A is not the easternmost north-south road. It's different. So we have some similar language in our sea turtle lighting ordinance. So we could potentially just mimic the language of the sea turtle lighting ordinance, or we could do the distances that you said, but we would modify it a little bit for that southern part where A1A is not the right road to reference.
Okay, so again, the vote is approving all of the zoning incentives with the exception of the height, in which case it will be rewritten to mimic the sea turtle rules.
Update my motion to that if we'll update our second. Yeah.
Okay, the updated motion has been updated and seconded. All those in favor? Online? Liz?
I'm a no because of this change for the southeast, the lower southeast section, because we don't know how that would read.
Okay, I can look it up real quick. It's just that A1A isn't the furthest east-west road. It's just, when you get down to
that.
Turtle Mound, it's,
Technically, A1A stops at Dunlop. Once you get south of Dunlop, it's now South Atlantic, which is a county maintained road. So what we're saying is that the easternmost road, so again, I will try and get onto the sea turtle lighting ordinance to reflect what that is, so the record is clear.
Okay, so then we're saying the southeast portion would be that of South Atlantic.
yeah, exactly what the sea turtle lighting boundary is now.
Okay.
On the barrier island.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I can vote yes.
Any opposed? The motion carries and the zoning incentives are. And we typically take a break at 2:30 for 10 minutes. We're almost at 2:30. Shall we do that really quickly since we're at the stopping point? Let's try to make it back in 5 instead of 10.
Melissa,
Yes, John.
I'm going to sign off at this time.
Thank you so much for being with us and wherever you're going. I hope it's pleasant.
Home.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
coming home. So, yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back when you get here.
I've been looking everywhere for you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We love it.
Oh, gosh.
Great job.
Somebody asked my question. Sorry.
I think you did.
Somebody asked me to thank you.
That's why. So.
I must have fallen into St. Paul, and I came and filled it out. Now it's not related. My family, like, no, I don't think you're in it. It's making my, like, understand one person who's over St. Paul.
Well, if this is good, but you are.
You're fortunate.
I like it to be good.
I'm supposed to. I would say, we're in my for a while, resume, and it's like that.
You're also really working speaking. And I ended up speaking. In the following context. And then I was also a police, flood insurance, FEMA rep,
That's part of it. It's like, I had this license. I'll be right.
So if you see the trend.
Yes. Yeah. It's all in those. Yeah.
Call for the panels in the enter. In the enter, and going to be similar to the wood portion for the TV center.
Ding, ding, ding. Tell me. Bob Fitzsimmons is chatting together.
They're cutting these for slack.
Yeah, we're not cutting you with.
Yeah, well, it's a one-time deal,
You know.
for those who just signed up. Samantha, would you like to pick up where we left off, the environmental incentives?
All right. So moving right
Just
along
Ryan to sit down and.
instead of, yeah, he'll do it. Okay, this is our one environmental incentive that we have. As you can see on the screen, it's reduction in tree replacement requirements. Are there any questions or discussion on this one, or can we get a motion?
It's trees, there's gonna be a discussion. Wendy?
So why would we do that? So some of this is a little bit funny because we're talking about the incentives in the absence of talking about the BMP that you would have to do to get the incentive, right? And they're definitely tied together. But so the theory is that if you do the things that would get you this incentive, such as preserving the floodplain or retaining additional tree canopy or clustering your subdivision, that you're protecting more trees on the site, and we would be supportive of allowing you to replace a smaller percentage. So instead of the 15% that's required now, it would be 10%. But in exchange for that, you're already preserving the trees that are on the site. So we're incentivizing keeping trees rather than taking them out and providing replacement.
Yeah, to add to that, as we condense the development area, we just have less area to replant, and it can be quite difficult to bring a tree out in the middle of the woods and dig a hole without disturbing other trees to plant it and then get irrigation to it. It's something we're running into in a lot of our natural preservation buffers. It's that it's very hard to augment them and meet some of the minimum landscape buffer standards and preserve everything and meet irrigation standards and all of that fun stuff.
Any more questions? And this is the sole one we need to take a vote on?
Yes, it's the only environmental incentive.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion made by Bill Light, seconded by Wendy Anderson to approve Chapter 2 environmental incentive. That's written. All those in favor?
Aye.
And I will note that John Havlick is not with us anymore. He had to leave. Any opposed?
I'm a yes.
That sounded like a tummy problem. Liz, did you want to say something, or we put you in with the yays?
Yes, I'm a yay.
Okay, there apparently are no nays. There was a moan, but no nays, so the motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so then our last three incentives are, there's two related to fees. One's building permit fees, then there's reduced land development fees, and then we have an other category that we can just go ahead and group together, and that's a variance and or waiver not required. They're pretty straightforward. That last one's letting people do these incentives by right, or these BMPs by right, and then we have reduction in fees. So there's no questions on any of those.
Okay, sorry to have a question on this. So let's say that this became a really popular thing and developers are all over the place. Are like, I'm going with the LID. What would be the economic impact to the county's budget if we had reduction of fees? Would this, I mean, how much of the revenue, how much of the budget is derived from revenue from fees?
So we haven't done a full fee study in a number of years, and we have one budgeted for this coming year. The last time we did it was in 2007. I know for environmental, the actual fees we collect are somewhere less than 50% of the cost to provide the service. I believe that to be true in our land development, and building permit fees do in fact pay enough for themselves. That's required by law. So in terms of land development fees, we already don't recoup what it costs to provide the service, and that's part of the service that taxpayers get as citizens. So it's a little bit unknown, and, you know, if everybody decided to do this, it could potentially be an issue. The great thing about the way we've structured this is that these are all in the manual and not in the code. So let's say that happened and everybody's coming in and they're getting their 10% fee reduction and the budget's tanking, which I would love that to be a problem. We can rethink it, right? We can look at it because it's in the manual. So it's a little bit of a trial and error.
Yes.
And I was going to say on that, on the building permit side, there is already a quite hefty reduction if you do like third-party reviewers under the Florida statute. So I may just suggest that we exclude, don't let them overlap that in the draft.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any further questions? I'm assuming we might want to treat the incentives as one batch too, as we did other.
Yes, we could do the two fees and then the other category, which is the waiver.
Yeah. So any more questions on the first page that Sam shared? The reduced building permit fees. If not, we have reduced land development fees, correct? Tell us what this means.
So this is just a reduction in the specific land development application fees. There's 3 different subdivision application processes, and we're only calling out one of the site plan process because the other one is a very low fee and is very conceptual. So that would, for their initial application fee, they would have that reduction of 10%.
Any questions on this incentive? Next thing that we would list about?
Yeah, so no, that would be it. So it sounded like maybe there's a motion coming that approves these with the modification that reduced building permit fees don't apply if they're also using a third-party review and getting a fee reduction for that. Make a motion as stated.
Have a second.
Second.
Motion made by Jessica Gao, seconded by Sarah Lee Morrissey. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Bliss, I'm assuming you're a yes, unless I hear you be a nay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, did that motion include this section, the other variance underway?
That's what I was holding out for.
I don't think we need a motion for the very last one because it's just restating the fact that if you do these things, it's allowed by right, and you've already put that in the code. So I think we're good on that one.
Okay, you were provided the matrix, which is just a quick overview of what incentives go with what BMP. And then there is the BMP table that has everything more detailed within that. I'm gonna move past those real quick, and we're gonna get into our best management practices, or BMPs. So you have 2 groups here. The one is the site design, and then the next is the stormwater storage treatment and conveyance BMPs. In here, we're going to discuss the requirements that a developer has to, or an engineer has to put on the plan to gain incentives. We're not talking about which incentives they're gaining yet, just this is what you have to do on your plan. Now, if everyone had time and did review them, we can have motions for groups, or if we're going one by one, how are we wanting to tackle this today?
Is maintaining natural topography, would that go hand in hand with maintaining the natural vegetation in the same area?
Yeah, for sure. Wherever you're maintaining the topography, we're hoping that you're maintaining the vegetation that exists there. But there could be cases, if it's a, prior pasture or whatever, you could maintain the topography and then maybe there isn't really any natural vegetation. But we're hoping, and you can see in the chart that we identified things that go together really well, and BMPs that go together. And in this case, you're right. Preserving the natural topography goes really well with retaining tree canopy and native vegetation.
To Samantha's question about whether we want to go through these one by one, approve them en masse, I don't know if we should just do a quick read through of them, perhaps, and then vote, maybe not belabor them, because we did have the opportunity to look at them before we go through them.
Okay, would you like me to go through all of them at one time, or you want me to go one by one?
I think it would make sense to go through them with logical grouping, or.
Yeah, so maybe what we do is we talk about each one that is in the site design, and then discuss any of those and vote in mass at the end of all the site design with whatever changes you have identified.
Okay. A lot of site design to go through. Let's start it. First one is maintain natural topography. There are 2 options here. It's an option A and an option B that the developer can choose from. Option A is to maintain a natural topography for 30% of the site. Area must be contiguous and preserved with a conservation easement dedicated to Volusia County, severing all development rights. then it states that it must be depicted, that square footage and acreage, on the plan set. Option B is that the notes on the final plat or the final site plan must state stem wall construction is required for all primary structures. If a subdivision, this must also be stated within the DCCRs, the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. That fill or grading is limited to the footprint of the building and the upstream side of the structure to route water around as necessary. This must be depicted on the engineered drawings.
Any questions on that? Those two choices kind of followed by,
And I guess my question is, do we have land where we think that there's going to be room for us to build stormwater systems below existing grade and above any floodplain or wetland things where we're going to be developing? The idea, I mean, stem wall construction is great if we're trying to avoid fill in a floodplain, but we still have to manage the stormwater in the lot. So I guess I'm just curious what the design concept is for it. I've tried to implement this with limited success. So, yeah, option B. Just because of stormwater criteria.
I think the intent is that where you are able to, you're going to, a stem wall construction, large in part over a fill-on grade is going to be beneficial for the topography as it is. So it's really going to be a matter of, you make a good point about you have to have the right land that you can apply it to, but that's up to the developer to decide if they have that property and if they can utilize it. That's the beauty of having so many options for them.
John?
Since fill grading is limited to the footprint of the buildings, the fill would be the footprint of the building, the grading would go to the fill, right? But that's not clear in this. It looks like, you can just build a little mound and put that building on top. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think the intent was, we can reword it, but the grading was the upstream side of the structure for the routing of the water. I think that's how it was intended, and the fill is in the footprint, and then, the grading for that. So, but yeah, it can be reworded.
Donna. Followed by Tom. And Tyler, do you still have your love? Is that okay?
Yeah, this goes back to Tyler's point. I'll have to interrupt the
We're having a
conversation.
side.
This goes back to your point in the statement here, and you brought this up, John. It says fill and grading is different apps. I mean, you're typically in an area, if we're doing one of these where there's a floodplain, this is very flat terrain. This is not hilly terrain, and you're going to have to fill a little bit to make it an A, B, or C drainage, whatever is required, under the circumstances. So to absolutely say you can't fill a lot, I think makes meeting any kind of stormwater requirements nearly impossible.
I think I should restate that if you can only grade on the upstream side, it's very hard to create a collection swale on the downstream side, which is pretty necessary for the other elements of our code in some way have collection. So you have limited natural topology opportunities for this in rural pollution county.
Well, I think the question is it stem wall on all the lots? Is that the intent, or is it stem wall? There will be opportunity to where the topography lends itself that you could put a stormwater pond at the rear of a group of lots, and those could be stem wall. So maybe do you need a threshold, like a certain percentage, or because if all of them are stem wall, they may not be able to apply that. But if the intent is to meet that where they can, I think that's the question that needs to be.
We had Tom and then back to Bob.
Thank you. This isn't a question. This is an observation. I've worked with a lot of land development codes all over the place. And I'm a big believer in illustrations because they tell a picture, or these things that we're talking about now, will there be accompanying illustrations like this issue right now is a perfect case in point. What the gentleman talked about back slopes to get to the stem wall and things like that. Have any of these been brought forward or be considered? Just, again, I'm the last guy in the class. I'm back holding everybody up.
Yeah, so we would certainly be willing to put examples if somebody had, we haven't found drawings that would be appropriate, but certainly we could use that if anybody has, an example drawing that we could use. Just really quickly, remember that this is optional, right? So this is one way to get an incentive. It's not the only way. And so as we're talking about that, just keep in mind, this isn't us saying all developers from now on must do this. This is if you want to do an LID development, this is one of the things you could do to get to your required number of LID elements.
I think it would be helpful just for a second for the newer members of our committee to let them know what the LID process was in terms of our work. County got a grant to come up to create a low impact development manual. And as part of that grant, they also audited the existing land development codes to find anything that already was an element of LID existing in the ordinances and anything that was an impediment to implementing LID. And we saw an example of that earlier today when we were talking about the curves, that's coming out of the language. That the county council made a decision a year ago, last October, to adopt LID as optional on the part of developers and builders. We were under the strictures of SB 250, where you couldn't create any onerous kinds of changes to codes after Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Hurricanes Ian and Nicole. So at any rate, LID is completely optional. And what we have decided to do is to take an approach that incentivizes it. So it's really important as we go into these fine points. And I'm certainly someone who forgets this often, that nobody is required to do all of these. Everybody is required to do a few of them in order to gain incentives. That changes the stakes a little bit. Bob.
Yeah, I realize that this is all optional, but you want it to be attainable. So, Storm, you mentioned something I thought was a good idea. Maybe there should be a threshold in there sometime for the amount of fill that you can use to, modify the drainage, because in, these cases of really flat rain, 100-foot deep lot to meet minimum drainage, I only need to put a foot of fill. So, maybe something like that to allow the engineer to have the flexibility to design a site and get the water where we need it to go, rather than coming flat out and saying you can't have any fill at grade.
Sure, yeah, if there is language that is proposed, this language, that second paragraph came directly from the county engineer during one of our meetings. So if you have additional language to change it to, we're all ears.
My additional language would just be to put a threshold there that, no more than 12 inches. I mean, in a typical 100-foot lot, that gets me to 1%, which is my minimum fall requirement by every regulation.
So are you asking us to come back?
That's, I guess.
Well, I'm trying to understand. So you're saying on all of, if this is a subdivision, you would say all of the lots you could fill up to
12 inches.
and get an incentive for preserving the natural topography.
Well, we're only talking about the lot where the house is built. We're not talking about the entire subdivision. You've already preserved, whatever, 30%.
This wouldn't be on a lot by lot basis. It would be at the subdivision level. Like a single lot isn't gonna come in for LID development.
So what I have a challenge with in viability, and I think this is what Bob is trying to get words together of, is we're requiring stem wall construction and we can only grade the side of the house that water's sloping towards for the purpose of getting it around the house. We're going to need to grade on the downside south, down slope side of the house somewhere in order to deal with collection, or say the lot naturally slopes towards where we're going to build our road. We're going to be grading our road, things of that nature. it's not that we're necessarily trying to clear cut, mass grade, re-level the site or raise it 5 feet, things of that nature. It's the minor changes to be able to harmonize. This is a pretty restrictive set of language that says none. And we're trying to find a way to give us the little bit of allowance and flexibility to be able to do those types of things.
That's all. Yeah.
So how would you say that? How would you write that?
Plus or minus 12 inches for purposes of harmonization and stormwater conveyance.
Over the whole lot though, for an entire subdivision? Then my argument back to that is that you now aren't maintaining the natural topography. If you've got 50 lots or whatever it is, and each lot has 12 inches of fill on it.
I mean, if you strip topsoil and you build a house anyway, you don't want any organics under your foundations or under your driveways, or we have to put utilities in. I mean, to some extent, when we're talking it depends on the size of the lot. If we're talking 1 acre lot, that's different than if we're talking a 6,000 square foot or 8,000 square foot lot. In which case, grading 6,000 square feet, I don't think is, I think that is conducive to what's required to build the house. And to make the stormwater work and to harmonize things. Even with the stem wall construction, there's a level of grading that has to happen in order to facilitate drainage, even of the foundation. I mean, I hear your concern, I don't know how to overcome the challenge.
And to me, it's good to put in close to the dirt over the whole site. You're gonna kill any trees that are on there. Right? Yeah, so that is where we have a conflict when Jessica.
For the purposes of this, knowing that we'll always argue when site plans come in. If we were to revise this to say is limited to the footprint of the building and the size of the structure to route water around as necessary, does that give you the downstream item you're looking for?
So you're saying remove the word upstream and just say sides.
I think the challenge is effectively the mention of grading on the lot. I mean, we're going to be grading a road. We're going to be grading where the houses are going to be built to some extent. So stem wall, you don't have to necessarily grade beyond. We're going to be grading for a drainage collection system of some kind. We're going to be grading for stormwater. Those are going to be the areas that grading is required. And I think you find a way to allow those. The grading is limited to these purposes. And that changes in finished floor, things of that nature need to be achieved through stem walls instead of through filling of the lots. I mean, and that's where a finite restriction is really difficult. I mean, I haven't come prepared for this also, so I'm playing a little bit of the game in my head of trying to phrase it on your side.
The other alternative is we can eliminate option B and just stay with option A, that you get the incentive if you maintain natural topography over 30% of the site.
And then the third option is we could leave it the way it is and see if anybody does it. And if anybody doesn't, and whenever we do an update, we just take it out then.
And
We have lots of options.
I have 2 subdivisions that I've kind of had carte blanche design that I've tried to play with LAD on, and both of them might meet 30% rule of maintaining natural topography. I think that is an achievable goal. I mean, we could leave this in, but I think if there's a way to loosen it where it's a little bit more achievable, that might give you guys a little bit more bang for your buck. I'm not against the concept of it. I just think that it's hard to achieve the goal that you have and meet all of the other requirements we have.
On the bill.
Bill grading is limited to the perimeter of the building as needed to route water to the stormwater system.
That works.
I'm a walk. Short word walk. That works, right?
Bill.
That's good, that's or a percentage of the lot.
You're not identifying anything exact. You do what you gotta do to get it to the front of the yard, to get it to the street.
And then you guys can do that.
I like those words, but I think that without some sort of limitation on that, then the do what you gotta do could end up being a significant amount of fill over the lot, and then multiply that each lot by however many lots there are, and you could end up with a traditional subdivision, which is permittable, but perhaps not something we want to incentivize. So maybe that language with some sort of limit, but not more than, or I don't know.
12 inches is more than enough.
Oh, I'm not so much thinking about how high it is, but how big it is.
So the issue you're having is a definition of perimeter, right?
Right, because
So,
yeah,
or
it's the whole
defining
lot.
perimeter.
Yeah, if it's 12 inches over the whole lot, that's not
So
fantastic.
does a farm can have perimeter width necessarily solely to convey water? Or is that still, I have no idea. I'm not an engineer and I shouldn't try to do this. I don't play them on TV. Jasmine.
We have building coverage or lot coverage, right? That's like 35%. But there's obviously more, 'cause this will include driveways and the drainage. Is there a percentage that staff is whispering about perhaps that builds in enough room of this percentage of the lot can be filled? I think is where we're going, right? The footprint of where the fill could be. And if it's can't be more than 50%, then that's
I would maybe suggest a type offset from building or something along those lines and have a requirement putting the at grade and that the grading be limited to roughly 15 feet. That's what you want to do. Just build up a little bit against your building, drain your water 5 to 10 feet away from the building and then slope back to grade and have a small swale. If you have a 3-acre lot, 15% is going to be extremely large to accomplish that. And on 5,000 square feet, I might not have room. So
Tyler, can I try to say what you said again and use the original language? So limited to a 15-foot perimeter around the building needed to direct stormwater. I feel like there's something that's to be said, but. So stem wall construction, fill and grading up to 15% around the perimeter of that structure to direct stormwater wherever it needs to go.
conveyance, I mean, just to facilitate stormwater conveyance and collection.
Unless approved otherwise by the county engineer. There'll always be exceptions. And there are very creative engineers out there.
Okay. Where are we? You were wordsmithing, Ginger, fill gradings limited to the footprint of the building and 15 feet around the building as necessary to
facilitate stormwater conveyance.
And any comments on, I didn't copy Tom's comment about there saying that the county engineer has a final say so on that, or?
A lot of authority.
Yeah. John J, not John H, but John H. Luttrell.
If you do the 15 feet and you have a house adjacent, that's going to put 30 feet between the two buildings. Well, I mean, typical setback, or at least is 7. So if you have two buildings and you have 14 feet between, and that's where the swell is, because you're not allowed to dump water on someone else's property.
Right, it would just be an option, no matter the mandatory.
Okay. All right.
That's what we did a lot in the room, but.
Okay, so.
Okay. I have that. I think we're good. We could make a motion on that one if you want, or we can save it to, I don't know, whatever you want. Maybe we do a motion on that one because we have talked a lot about
I
it.
think we're good with that. So would someone like to make a motion, the, We had option A, which was not controversial at all. Option B, we have rewordsmith to indicate a 15-foot perimeter around the building to convey stormwater as necessary. So would someone like to move regarding this site design?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. Well, wait a second, discussion. I move. Yeah.
Second.
Second,
Okay, moved by Bob Kitson, seconded by Tom Burbank. Discussion.
I think that minimal fill should be in that conveyance sentence, maybe, forget the depth, just minimal fill, enough to accomplish the conveyance.
And grading is going to be part of it because we can cut, and that's where minimal cut you can build to accomplish. This is the goal.
Right.
Okay. Are we ready to vote then? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Next one. Preserving floodplain. There is only one option for this one. There's not an A and B. It is 100% of the FEMA flood hazard areas identified at the time of application are protected through a conservation easement dedicated to Volusia County, severing all development rights when they encompass 30% or more of the site. This can include the tree preservation area required by the development code.
The deal with this is allowing the tree preservation area to meet requirement. That would already be true now. Any questions on this? Let's move on. Thank you.
Okay, next one is retaining tree canopy. There is only one option for this. Retain an additional 5% of the square footage of any development for the preservation of existing trees beyond the minimum requirements of the Land Development Code as a conservation easement dedicated to Volusia County, severing all development rights is required.
Any questions?
It's beyond, so there's already 15% required, so it's an additional 5.
Right now, the easement is over the tree protection.
Oh, yeah, it would just be over, we're only requiring it for that additional 5%.
Any questions? Wendy?
So just to clarify, maybe this is what you just said. I was thinking and not listening. Can you double dip on this with the floodplain?
Yes.
Okay.
Was that a yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Any more questions? Comments? Okay, Sandy, you please.
Okay. Retaining large riparian or vegetated natural buffers, we do have an option A and B for this one. Option A is to retain a 20% greater buffer than the minimum required by Division 11, which is the wetland ordinance, adjacent to all wetland or surface waters on 100% of the site. Option B is retain a 20% greater natural landscape buffer than the minimum required by the zoning ordinance along all property boundaries.
Any questions?
Cluster subdivisions. We have that they must follow the provisions that are already established within the zoning ordinance. And the next one there is conservation subdivisions, is that they must follow the provisions that are already established within the land development code.
Any questions on that? Sorry.
Can we change whichever one that I don't like to allow wetlands to count for LID?
That would be the cluster subdivision subdivision.
It's a long history of.
Do not allow wetlands to count toward
The open space set aside.
space requirement. Yeah.
Help us out. You're not fine.
Yeah. So-
Isn't that part of our separate discussion we were raised out of the workshop that we were working through?
If so, that's great.
And just for everybody's clarification, there's within the cluster subdivision, you don't get to count wetlands towards your minimum open space requirements. And so therefore, there was a concern that it's overly restrictive and prevents many of these cluster subdivisions from going forward, because once we factor in the wetlands, it typically exceeds what the minimum open space is. And so therefore, it seems like it's an additional requirement in order to do the cluster subdivision. That fair statement. And so staff from the county is working with B-Card on how to address that and other open space situations.
So this is like industrial too.
Sure,
But much less, you know.
less contentious.
There you go, that's what I want. If it's running a parallel path, that's fine. I just know if it wasn't, if we could build it into this, but I am fine.
So we leave as is.
Right, next is common open space. There are two options here. Option A is provide an additional 5% common open space beyond the minimum required. This cannot include the minimum tree preservation area required by 7237. Option B is where no minimum common open space is required, provide a minimum 15% common open space, and it also must exclude the tree preservation area.
Jessica has questions.
For both of these, another discussion point that maybe we fix, but if this is different than the PD, I'm gonna say it again. Especially for option A, can we include that while it cannot include the minimum tree preservation area, it can be comprised of naturally vegetated areas?
I think it's opposite of that, right? So if you're talking about the natural vegetation retention area requirement, no, you're just saying it could include
Just natural areas, because right now under the PD regulations, only a certain percentage of the common open space can be natural, and the other has to be active recreation.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify that this design is for natural.
Yeah, right now, the PG requires 10% covered open space, and above that 20%. 10% for additional tree protection. And I think if you're talking, that's one discussion. The other discussion we had is under the cluster subdivision. The incentive to do small lots. The trade-off is you get lesser side setbacks. And smaller lot size and lot width requirement. But then you turn around and you give that reduction area, and you save that, put it in common open space. But that balance, and not including the jurisdictional wetland areas, which you're already after people. So the idea is you're protecting land since you're getting the much reduced lot size.
So I think, Jessica, I think we could say this cannot include the minimum tree preservation area required, however, it could be natural area.
And I think that's perfect. I just don't want the LID manual to say, create more playgrounds, because that's what counts as common.
Okay.
Any other comments to this page?
Do we want to have a motion on that one since there is a change?
It's not that.
Do we-
We could keep, I think we could go, since it's an easy one.
Okay. All right, moving along.
Then
Corridor protection. Two options. Option A is preserve natural land, which provides connection to or is within the Florida Wildlife Corridor and continues through the development project to allow future connection and expansion of the corridor. This area must be at least 30 feet wide and can count toward the required 15% tree preservation area. Conservation easement dedicated to Volusia County, severing all development rights is required. Option B is creation of an internal vegetated multi-use trail of pervious material that connects to a larger pedestrian or bicycle network. This area, the area dedicated to this use must include existing or planted native shade tree species and native understory vegetation. Tree species chosen must have enough space from the trail to ensure survival as approved by the county forester.
I don't know, well, this is 30 feet, a corridor standard, is it?
It's standard used by environmental permitting during the development.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this, Wendy?
So just clarification on the term Florida Wildlife Corridor, is the Volusia Wildlife Corridor officially part of the Florida Wildlife, the Volusia Conservation?
Yeah, the Volusia Conservation Corridor is,
It's an official subset of the Florida Wildlife.
it's not, it doesn't serve the same purpose, but they do overlap.
They were.
Not exact, so we just wonder if we want to be more inclusive here than just the Florida Wildlife Corridor. To be.
So within the wildlife corridor or the Volusia Conservation Corridor.
Yeah, because that's already included. Sure. Thank you.
It's right in the mic.
Any additional questions, comments? Okay. Round the roll.
Native landscape, fertilizers and irrigation. Option A, all planted vegetation within a commercial site is 100% Florida native species, including grasses. Smart irrigation controllers are required for the irrigation system. Educational signage describing the benefits of native plants and Be Floridian Now fertilizer principles are placed throughout public spaces. Option B, the long one. The subdivision, common areas, and landscape buffers must have 100% Florida native vegetation, including grasses. Smart irrigation controllers for the irrigation system, and educational signage describing the benefits of native plants and Be Floridian Now fertilizer principles placed throughout the common areas. In addition, 20% of the square footage of each residential lot must be planted with and maintain native vegetation. Irrigation systems for the individual lots must have smart irrigation controllers. The plat notes and the declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, reduced CPRs must identify individual lot requirements. A typical planting detail is required to be provided with the preliminary plat application.
Jessica.
Two questions on this. One, Florida native, not friendly.
Yeah,
Correct.
native, right.
On the, what I have heard, and I want to know if you guys have heard, is that when planting Florida native full landscape buffers with trees, it is hard to find Florida native product that's available at the minimum size for tree placement. Is that known?
Yeah, at the right size.
At the right
not
size.
just the availabilities. The right size.
Three ordinance to go in, you should have that. That's native.
Jessica, you said you got 2 questions? That's it? Okay, then Tyler, then Donna.
Wait, can I just say what Keith said for the record? Because I'm sure the record did not hear him. So the answer was at the minimum replacement size of 2 inches, there is not, you can find Florida native trees. Larger than that, they're a little bit harder to find.
And so the next questions for Tyler and then Donna.
Just to confirm, are there any Florida native turf grasses? Is there any sod?
There are ground covers leave outside. But there's ground cover.
So what is the Florida native ground cover? Is it pretty peanut?
No, you have finely native flora, fruit, you have Mimosa stridulata, which is sunshine mimosa. You have, I believe there's a basket grass. Here.
There's seashore paspalum, so you say it, yeah, and it comes in a roll, just like a turf grass that you can use, especially beachside.
It's not technically turf grass, you can get it.
And I'm very pleased with river sage, salvia masala, as a ground cover on my property. And I can send you a feed.
There's wiregrass, love grass.
10 feet water, no water, it's pure sand.
That's okay, sunshine mimosa, I don't have irrigation.
Oh, sunshine mimosa grows on the west side.
Done.
I'm gonna put on my landscape nursery hat since I had one for 10 years. And the problem I have with the language here is that xeriscape is more appropriate than requiring native. Only because xeriscape is the right plant in the right spot. If you put some native plants in soggy areas, they're going to die. If you put some native plants in dry areas, they're going to die. And native plants are very hard to find commercially grown. They are just not all that easily accessible. So I'm a little concerned about restricting this language to native as opposed to xeriscape.
May I respond to that?
Of course.
So, because this is something we've been going around on a lot, Florida friendly, branded by UFIPUS, which focuses on xeriscaping, and focuses on water preservation. And actually, full disclosure, working in the city of Ormond Beach on their codes right now on this. This, I'll remind, this is not compulsory, this is an incentive, so it's not a requirement for everyone. Xeriscaping, a xeric landscape is one that is arid, and we are flood and drought, and flood and drought. Absolutely, you should not plant anything anywhere if it's not right plant, right place. That principle of Florida friendly is certain, because you're just wasting your money to put the wrong plant in the wrong place. So I don't think that xeriscaping or just landscaping to protect water sources goes far enough in the reality of Florida today, where we are threatening the biodiversity of our state, the very foundations of our biodiversity, which are insects, which tend to eat only the native plants that were here prior to European colonization. And it is a problem. It's even a potential problem for agriculture. I don't really want to take over the whole meeting, but I can talk much more about this. So if this were a requirement, I think we have to have a discussion about availability and things like that, but this is optional, and you can do it on the lots, or you can do it in the common areas. And I think it's important that low impact development, while it deals a great deal with water and stormwater, I think part of that impact is not negatively impacting ecosystems. And the plants are certainly part of a system, the foundational impact to our food chain. So that's my advocacy in favor of keeping this as it is. And I think, I don't know if Keith is masquerading as clay, but then
Yeah, I am. The zoning code already requires 100% natives. The tree removal code requires the same species removed to be put back unless the county forester approves additional species. I will never approve non-native species be planted for tree species. So it is technically required already.
But I think we were talking ground cover.
Yeah, ground covers, but in the zoning code, it is required. Yeah.
Donna and Wendy.
I just wanted to clarify that xeriscape is the right plant in the right place. It's not specifically for arid or for dry areas or anything like that. So I wanted to clarify that. And also, I remember this going on, and I don't know to what extent this has ever been resolved, but there's a big debate over how to define what's native. Because it's very hard to figure out how a plant landed here. Whether it was the product of a bird dropping, flying over us from somewhere else, or something that floated up in a storm, and ended up taking root. So I would want to be careful about the extent of the definitions too.
Wendy.
I don't think it's worth our time to debate the definition of xeric, but
Not here.
Xeric does mean arid, and so xeriscape originally was meant to to convey a landscape planted for water conservation. Anyway, but my point was, I'd like for us to zero in on the distinction here between common area plantings in a subdivision versus residential lots. And so we're talking about 100% native plantings in the common areas and landscape buffers. But on the residential lots, it specifies only 20% of the square footage of the lot. So I'm uncertain if that also includes the square footage that's covered by the building and the driveway. You know, and then, or is this 20% of the planted area? Can we be more clear there?
The way that it was intended, that it's the overall square footage of the lot, 20% of that would be planted with the native vegetation.
Okay, so typically how much of the lot is covered by the building and the driveway?
And what if you cluster it and have the setbacks, excuse me for interjecting.
Yeah.
So you're smaller lot size.
Yeah,
Being
yeah.
creative and outside the boxes places.
And so all of my questions, if I can just kind of roll them out all at once, like if we're worried that we're gonna not be able to have St. Augustine sod, which we really shouldn't, but that might be prohibitive for some. I mean, like, maybe we don't have to have frog fruit and sunshine mimosa as everybody's front yard. If we have some leeway here on what we can plant on the residential lots. I mean, I would go for 100% native on the residential lots, but that probably won't fly. Unless you're Sunbridge or something. So I just think it might be worth unpacking that for a little bit right now.
Jessica.
I was just gonna say, when I read the common area versus the lots, even Sunbridge has some sections where the residential lots have sod. They just try to limit it. And I think their backup materials, and it's been a while, for the kind of transition plan to the native planting, also put out 20%, but I don't know if it was 20% of the planted or overall. So that is a.
To answer your question on impervious coverage, we typically see our denser subdivisions upwards of 50%, all the way towards 75% is kind of the upper limit that you see in zoning anywhere. It depends on the community, municipality that you're with in the county. Looking through the code, there isn't an impervious in our base zoning. There's a building coverage restriction, but you can literally pave everything on your buildable area of site. We're covering it with an impervious surface.
80%, yeah. So I think that's why you picked the 20, because 80% is allowed to be impervious, so the 20% technically would be your landscaping area, your open space. So that would be the native vegetation.
So I'm going to clarify that because that kind of fed into my question comment. So this is recognizing that basically 20% of any lot is what can be vegetated. Once you have taken advantage of what you can do in terms of impervious surfacing. Although we hope that if you're doing LID, you're not going to be impervious. So we're saying 20% of 20% planted in native plants.
No, we're saying 20% of the total. If your lot, whatever like your lot is 20% of it.
Is that would equal 100% natives? Because if 20% of the lot.
If you did the full.
Right, which is atypical, but that's what they use as for the drainage calculations up to a theoretical maximum of 80%.
Okay, my only comment then on that is that both Audubon and Florida Native Plant Society recommend at least 70% for natives for biodiversity. So we're well below what any native is good, moving in the right direction. We're well below what's recognized as supporters of biodiversity. And again, we're talking also about, if we're doing clustering development, we're having interesting shapes and sizes of lots because we're employing LID and we're going to leave lots of open space. Lots of natural area. We may be talking about very small areas potentially for each home, right, Glenn? 100%. Okay, thank you.
So are we ready to changes? I don't know. Guess we need to.
Sounds like not. Sounds like we're good, right?
Wait,
We're moving on.
We have 2 minutes, we're on a roll.
Okay, habitat management. There is only one option here. It is to preserve 10 acres or more of contiguous undeveloped area with a conservation easement dedicated to Volusia County severing all development rights. This can include the tree preservation area required by the Land Development Code, and annual reports must be submitted to the Land Development Office.
And we recognize this is not going to be appropriate for all developments, right? Because they're not, all developments are going to be able to have 10 acres of this contiguous undeveloped area. But we felt like that was the minimum amount that you could actually do a habitat management plan for, right? So this isn't something that maybe even most people are going to be able to take advantage of.
Tyler, and then Wendy.
So part of my ignorance, what would go in that report?
What's in there?
I said part of my ignorance, but what would go in the annual report?
It would be something like what we do on our conservation land plans, right? So you identify what the desired future condition is of that habitat and you identify what the management actions are. And then every year you say what you've done toward that management plan. It doesn't have to be like big and involved, but there's basically an identification of what you're going for. And then what do you do? Do you provide fire on the site? Do you remove exotics? And then the annual report talks about what actions you've done.
And perpetuity. I mean, and I'm asking this because when I propose these things to clients, they ask me these questions. And then I feel really stupid because I can't usually come up with good answers for why it's a good idea for them to sign on to it.
Yeah, in perpetuity. Yeah.
Okay, that might be something for us to discuss.
Wendy and then Bill, and I think Bill had something informative to your question. But Wendy?
Having just,
And then Jessica.
having just moved out of a neighborhood that has 450 acres of managed habitat. It's, I mean, I think this is a great thing. I'm very cautious about the expectations that we can have of HOAs. And, and the ability to train the people who are actually managing those properties to know how to do this. Of course, they outsource it to environmental consulting firms like, Bill's, but yeah, so it's, no. I mean, I'm all about having habitat managed areas. It's great. I'm just.
450 acres being a big area. You know what the annual cost was for you guys? Very big.
I've been working neighborhoods, so.
Again, it's voluntary. Bill, Jessica, and Michelle.
Seems like a good idea and the reporting is all right. It'll keep people focused on it, but maybe not annual and maybe biennial or every 3 years. And that way people won't be quite so onerous.
Jessica and Michelle, then Wendy. Then Sarah.
Yeah, my only thing is that from a compliance standpoint, I am also fine with it, but at the time that they commit to this, you are giving an incentive. And so then if they don't do it, we just need to identify what that failure results in. Is it, if the incentive gets taken away and then the whole development becomes non-conforming, that's a lot. And so I just want to match what happens if they don't for this.
Yeah, so at that point, it would be that they're not complying with their, whatever it was, site plan approval or subdivision approval, and it would go through our code compliance process for non-compliance with their approved permit. It's a pain, but.
Look, can I add on to that? Because, Dr. Anderson, you hit it right on the head. HOAs can be difficult organizations. And again, when you give an incentive for a specific action and the action's not followed through, how do you bring it into compliance? Will you make the action happen? Well, then do you have to do a special assessment? And then does it become a responsibility of the county? Because now all of a sudden you may have a HOA completely disband. So it's not a perfect world in that situation, but that's ultimately the, worst case scenario in regards to code enforcement.
So just one step further.
We had Michelle and Sarah Lee.
I guess what I was gonna say was that there is no fee or, associated with not turning it in. So we'd recommend every 3 years seems reasonable for a management plan, not annually, and then having some kind of habit for the HOP documents. To hold them. So
I'm gonna argue otherwise. With volunteer organizations, something that is required annually has a better chance of actually happening over time because there's a consistency. And if there is a budget implication, it gets transferred year after year. Versus if we move towards something that is not annual, chances are, as people turn over, there is a much higher likelihood of something going by the wayside. So if this is a route that an applicant chooses, they see what the requirements, again, going back to the very beginning of all this, voluntary, and you're picking and choosing which ones of these things you want to implement. So I just wanted to say, I'm going to argue otherwise and keep it as annual.
Yeah, and I agree on the annual front. And I agree that it's fine to go against associations and there are risks, but they're not as great to me as if this isn't met and this is something they use to get smaller lot sizes. And so the incentive isn't taken away. I don't want the result to be all of those lots are legally non-conforming. And if a hurricane comes through, they can't rebuild. I just want to protect that side.
So I think that is certainly not our intent. If you feel like that needs to be stated clearly somewhere, I'm not sure where that is in the manual, like maybe we put a sentence somewhere in the manual that is like failure to comply results in code enforcement action, but does not render those lots. Okay, so not right here, but like sort of a blanket statement. Okay, that's a really good point. Tyler.
Sorry, it's a clarifying question. So how much active management is there and how much observation is there on these types of things? I mean, and in my mind, what I'm trying to scale is, say we said you need to report every year for 10 years to show that you've accomplished, like if there's habitat restoration or something else that's been achieved. But after that, isn't this just kind of almost code enforcement against, that somebody doesn't go and clear it or otherwise? And could we maybe reduce the burden so that there's a higher uptake rate and kind of put a sunset point on this? Or I just don't know what I don't know again.
So I would say every year we'll keep it in front of people's minds because people do forget. Now, you may not actually have to do any management for 1 year because burning, if you're lucky, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, depending on what the habitat's like. So you might just say 1 year you're spraying exotics and then next year looks good. You just do a report, but sunsetting would probably let people just forget.
So it's not just letting it return to natural state, it's in demand.
I think
Yeah,
it
and-
goes back to natural in terms of no invasive territory.
Right, because natural.
Understanding conservation easements aren't managed.
Right, and there is
And
actually.
so I'm failing to understand the difference between just conservation and the habitat management from an exposure.
And we will need to be aware that sometimes the management will be mulching down the understory, and that's gonna be hard for people to understand. But you need to manage it because just letting it go. Natural Florida never was let go forever. There was gonna be a fire, there's gonna be some disturbance that beats it back. So.
Wendy?
That's what I was gonna say, that, if you're managing 4 gopher tortoises or 4 sandhill crane nesting sites or, indigo snakes, for a particular wildlife species or group of species, scrub jays, if there's any left. Yeah, I mean, that requires, yeah, you're mulching down. I mean, most neighborhoods aren't gonna want to have prescribed burns right next to them. I mean, it would be ideal if we could figure out how to do that, but that doesn't typically happen. And yeah, I'm back to agreeing that we need to do it every year because there's always something to be done every year and it keeps it front of mind and in the budget for these folks. I think the disconnect happens that the developer is taking home the incentive, the HOA, and the residents do not get to directly benefit from that. They just have the burden of maintenance on it. So, but that's what they bought into.
May I give myself a turn? As Ginger said at the beginning, there'd be probably very few developments that would be able to take advantage of this because of everything that everyone has said about it. And I like it a lot, recognizing that maybe no one will pick it up, but now I'm devil's advocate because our code enforcement people do not have the technical knowledge to know if habitat, I guess that's why we have the plan, but there's got to be some kind of verification. And that also has a cost, a verification that there is a habitat management plan that makes sense. It's about managing habitat and not just what you brought up rightfully about conservation easements. And that someone walks it down this, you know? So I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here because a habitat management plan has to be reviewed by someone at the county who has the ability to do that. We do have that staff. Code enforcement people aren't going to know about that. Not even parks maintenance people know about that. But we do have people who can review that. It doesn't have to get inspected now and then. That it's actually being conducted.
Yeah, and that would typically happen as part of the annual report or whatever report. Like that would come into environmental management. It would go on our to-do list of things to do. And when somebody is in that area to do inspections, they'll, take a look at it.
Claim it was named too.
Well, Keith was whispering in my ear as well that that's currently one of our requirements for our conservation subs.
Yeah.
And well, we got 2 that are pending. We've had a couple in the works, but, again, it's one of those things that the report will be coming in. The great thing is now with a lot of the technology, we can start doing a lot of investigation without having to put boots on the ground unless it's necessary. And so, yes, you're correct. Our code enforcement staff are not skilled in the management plan evaluation, but Keith is, his staff will definitely do that. And so we'll be able to follow through with it. It is going to be as you said, and as Jessica referenced, it will be a code enforcement nightmare if we don't have a cooperative group.
Thank you very much. Any more comments or questions to habitat management under site design? Okay, is that our last site design?
I just want to make sure that we didn't vote to change it to some other than annual. Okay.
We realized you were.
Not the end of site design.
No, okay, so now we have alternative surface material. There is only one option here, a minimum 50% of the off-street parking spaces, excluding ADA parking spaces, and 100% of the sidewalks must be an alternative surface material, which could be permeable pavers, grass pavers, porous concrete, or porous asphalt. The pervious surface type must be identified on the civil plans, and I believe that Sarah Lee had a comment on this.
My comment was relative to ADA. We excluded ADA parking spaces from the alternative surface, which I thought was a good thing, but we insisted on 100% of the sidewalks. And I just think the path, the pedestrian path from those ADA spaces to wherever an entry is needs to be
So
thank you. My words, ADA compliant. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. I think we can put in those words. You may be able to, you can get ADA compliant and be pervious, but I think we
compliant.
yeah, put that in there so that it's clear. And if in fact, the way that they need to do that is by using an impervious surface, then so be it.
John and Tyler?
Just a question on what's the definition of civil plans?
Civil plans are typically what are submitted with the final site plan application, if it's a commercial site, or multifamily. And then it would be the preliminary plat, engineer plans as well.
Well, you just said that dirty word, engineer plans. Because, well, I mean, we architects can do anything, by the way. But landscape architects are the ones that do this the best, right? They use the word beauty and architects are allowed to do site plans. So if you say civil and you have engineering, I mean, I think it should just say site plan design.
Thank you. I will change.
Just gonna add, there's within Volusia County, at least one municipality that doesn't allow pavers under ADA paths. And the reason is because of if you're in a wheelchair or a power chair, you are basically on rumble strips. And if you have a spinal injury that's put you in that wheelchair or power chair, or additional to the injury that's put you there, it can be extremely painful. Basically, most of the alternative surfaces that we have an issue either with ground pressure, just survivability with ground pressure that's induced by hard rubber wheels, by high heels, by other normal things that happen on our ADA paths as a contact type, or because of the paver, the gaps in order to make them have a permeable area. And so I just think requiring it on sidewalks in general is getting us into kind of a risk area of uptake once again. We were already talking about maybe an alternative, but I just wanted to kind of add that pavers on ADA paths are really frowned upon.
John, did you still have your name up? Did you have any?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Well, that's something we think about.
So we've talked about adding the change that the walkways or the path from the ADA parking to the building would have to be ADA compliant. Do you think that's enough to cover what you're questioning? Because I mean, from our perspective, and we want to be clear in our language, but I'm thinking, okay, a site plan comes in and it's designed with a traditional sidewalk from that ADA spot up to the front door. We would say, okay, right? But do we need to specifically say that, or just saying that the walkway should be ADA compliant sufficient here?
I mean, you usually also have an accessible route to the sidewalk that is along the facility frontage. So basically, any of your identified accessible routes on the site plan are going to need to meet the firm, non-yielding, slip-resistant surface requirements that are in ADA. And so, you know.
Yeah, I think instead of remember that, make sure I got it. So the goal from the L&D standpoint was to minimize impervious spaces. We've come up against the need to accommodate people with disabilities. Certainly, if their parking space is ADA compliant, so does their route to wherever it is that they would wish to go. Does that then, and this is what I think you were clarifying, any other sidewalks or areas, could those be pervious? Or we're saying that just everything has to be.
Well, no, I mean, what I was getting at is, no, you have to identify accessible routes on your site for somebody that arrives by car or as a pedestrian or bus or other transportation mode that they use to accommodate their site. So obviously, if the only way in is by car, then you start looking at different accommodations. But you have to have an accessible route on all of your, basically providing you access. Otherwise, it's considered discrimination on it.
So,
are you saying no pervious substrate is ADA compliant?
I'm not saying that it's not. I'm just saying we have really limited options, and that
ADA compliance and compatibility with the intended use are a challenge with pavers. They're technically compliant. However, there are agencies that have had too many complaints from their use because they were specifying pavers. And so they've moved away from that. And I think just looking at it from let's accommodate, let's view the spirit of the rule of ADA is to make these facilities more accessible. I love pavers. I mean, my pool deck is pavers. It's got, the exfiltration drainage system underneath it. That's great, but they're a pain to maintain. They shift, they create challenges in this environment. All of your other permeable surfaces have the same type of challenge with asphalt and concrete. It's a durability challenge and a clogging challenge. When you go to maintain it, the pressure washer tends to blow apart.
So is the language that we have proposed, is there a way to change that to accommodate it? Or are you proposing to eliminate the 100% of the sidewalks altogether?
I mean, I think saying 100% of the sidewalks is definitely problematic. I would say the sidewalks that are not part of an identified accessible route.
Any other?
Yeah, I have a question. We're at the end of the meeting. We have some space, some things to go. I have a proposal is that we could stay another half an hour if people can stay and finish. Let's if we got everything. Or, we can reconvene in November. If we have to reconvene in November, we're putting off moving to PLDRC and council. It won't, yeah. So, but I don't know if everybody can do that, so.
Why don't we, there are people who have their cards up, but why don't we first just see if we have a quorum? If we stay an extra half hour, all those who are unable to stay.
Okay, so,
They can't count.
so then what I would suggest is that we should probably vote for, all of the things up until where we are, including some minor changes that we've made, and then we reconvene, and finish the next meeting.
Jessica, that's comments before you do that.
My understanding is that while we want this manual to accompany those items, they don't actually have to be acted on by those bodies, so just the ordinance and the comp plan. So could we say these are the drafts and that ENRAC is still reviewing the manual itself, but we've approved the comp plan and the ordinance to move forward?
That's pretty brilliant.
I would recommend, because that is going to be the issue, I think, let's go ahead. I agree that this can proceed on to the PLDRC and on to the county council. Because again, it's just getting through the manual. We can have the manual as an attachment without it having to go out with the official agenda packet.
But we would meet again and hopefully have it all fleshed out because of the whole agenda deadline stuff, right? We probably, because PLDRC is mid-November.
Yeah.
And we would meet in November, so. Brilliant.
So we'd have the draft manual up to this time as an attachment for the LDRC.
Correct. And then what we could speak to is if there's any changes from the November meeting of the ENRAC.
Yeah.
Jody and Sarah, we have their cards up.
So I was going to make the motion to go ahead and approve everything that we have discussed thus far. And then also just sort of separate from the motion, just note that we only have 2 categories left and they're very short. So
All right, fine. I'll second the motion. But I have a specific question. What and if it was said or stated, I'm sorry, I missed it. The guidance manual that we're spending our time on. And we talk about that it can be changed, more. What is the process for the guidance manual once ENRAC's not around?
Well, first of all, we don't know the life of NRAC based on the direction we had with drafting you. You've got at least about another 2 to 3 years being president.
Yes.
And so first and foremost that. Second of all, again, we don't know what we don't know with the inadequacies of the manual. So it's going to be basically a year timeframe, 2-year timeframe as we go through this and we see applicants coming in trying to utilize the handbook. And if they identify X, Y, and Z as being in, then we would bring it back to NRAC, bring it back, and it would be adopted by resolution by the county council.
Okay,
So it's not gonna, it wasn't that we were trying
Okay.
to short circuit, it's just that when you start looking at a official ordinance to the land development regulations, it creates greater issues as far as timing and being
Yeah,
able to
yeah.
respond.
got it. It was unclear to me what kind of process was
What's that?
envisioned, and it can't just be staff.
Well, you would have to, let's talk about
Okay, Wendy, you have your card as a major motion. Tyler.
So first, I agree with your comments on that, your concern. I think that we need more information. Second, I'm still having trouble with any HOAs and effectively any future homeowners with the management responsibility. I don't know how they find out about when they're buying the house. I mean, yeah, they bought into it, but it really feels like a gotcha. So right now I'm a no on all of this because it's all groups together. And I think that we have too many situations where we put the burden on HOAs. Excuse me, I have my mic off. But I think we have too many situations where we put burdens on HOAs, and then when things aren't successful, we leave a small group of people holding the bag for what was meant to be a greater good goal. And in this case, there's some clear incentives to creating a habitat management plan as a developer and leaving your future residents of that community holding the bag. And I just don't know how I'm having trouble with that one right now, digesting that.
just as an option. It's not necessarily alleviating, but it's creating something like a community development district. Depending on the size of the project itself, which is actually a taxing agency outside of a local government for a specific reason. Typically, they're utilized for infrastructure. I'm sure you probably dealt with them, but you can put in these types of things as part of their responsibilities. It just gives it a more formalized way of handling it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like I don't want it to go into people's legal description, but how do you get their attention if this is one of the things they're leading up to before they buy the house? I mean, it's when people complain this at council and they have a legitimate complaint, it's that they didn't know what they were getting into, and I see us setting that situation.
No, this is still on the phone, but she's a realtor and there's a realtor responsibility to disclose.
And when you go to close, you are signing HOA documents that you are participating and you are given a copy of the covenant and restrictions. So that's required prior to closing. That doesn't necessarily mean people are aware that they're selling.
We do that sometimes with the water management district where we have a conservation area, you have to have a management plan. It's like a 2-paragraph, one management plan, and then you put it in the codes and.
Yeah, and the covenants and restrictions, yeah. Well, it can also be in the CCR docs, then. Yeah.
Right. All right. I have one.
So how would that be an incorporated element of the incentives? Like, if a developer chooses this incentive, how do we make it a requirement that it's actually?
It's already law.
Well, I can tell you, especially with homeowners associations that are responsible for specifically like stormwater ponds. We have to see the covenants and restrictions and homeowners documents prior to recording of the final plat. And those have to be recorded so that way it covers over the properties.
And I just think if you took a poll of most people that live in a subdivision, they would know what the responsibilities of the HOA are and their funding. And that's where I'm hung up on this, is I don't like giving people an opportunity to hang somebody else, which is what I feel like we're doing here.
Yeah, to Tyler's point, I've been doing subdivision for many years, And yes, it's required. Yes, we provide copies of the DCCRs. We go through all that, and I can't tell you how many times people come back and go, well, nobody ever told me X, Y, Z. Even though they signed in several places that they received the docs, that they understand the docs. So, you know, to Tyler's point, yeah, how do you do that? How do you market that so it's really in front of somebody's face and it doesn't end up being a gotcha? And that's it.
I've always understood that ignorance of the law will then excuse me from following it. And I also have been on the board of my HOA.
I'm not defending them. I'm just making an observation. For decades, passing out these CCRs. Decades.
And I have experience with that too, with having to reinstate a voluntary HOA in my neighborhood, on riverfront and oceanfront property. So yeah, most people don't pay attention.
But
But it's so sad. Oh, that's a whole.
But this is all voluntary. We got to this point. Have we voted yet?
No, we do take really much of this stuff. So let's call it, because we need to get going. All those in favor of accepting the site design. We've been discussing all the different elements of site design. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
No.
See y'all in November.
Okay, wait.
Okay. Oh,
Second.
yeah.
On Sunday, there's a community expo at the Ocean Center called Celebrate Volusia. It's very cool from 2 to 5:30.
Follow with a free concert.
Wow.
All right, well,
So 3 out of 5 houses in neighborhoods that used to have an HOA and no longer have an HOA and now their stuff is maintained. So these are bringing this up against the